In one night, my perfect life crumbled, my wife's affair, my best friend's double life, and a dangerous secret that threatened everything I held dear. What I uncovered next turned my world upside down, and there was no going back. I can still recall the overwhelming impression my first day on an oil rig left on me, the massive machinery, the unending expanse of the ocean, and the tight-knit bond among the crew. Over time, the rigs became my second home, and the thrill of striking oil wove itself into my very being. Each successful drill and carefully laid pipeline symbolized a step closer to securing a stable future for my family, despite the long stretches of separation. As the years rolled on, the relentless demands of the job began to take their toll. The grueling hours, constant hazards, and unyielding pressure weighed heavily on me. Yet, with each paycheck, I found solace in the life I was building for my family, a life that I believed was worth every sacrifice. What I didn't know then was that these very sacrifices would one day force me to make the most challenging decision of my career. It had been over a year since I'd last rested in my own bed. The thought of returning home filled me with anticipation. But just as I was counting down the days, a powerful storm began brewing, forcing me to halt operations on the rigs. The decision was critical, the storm's intensity left no room for error. We had 5 wells drilled in the area, each spaced 20 nautical miles apart, and shutting them down required precise coordination. Thankfully, the process unfolded seamlessly, and the crew was evacuated without incident. Once everything was secured, the remaining team and I were flown back to shore by helicopter. Although it wasn't my scheduled time off, I decided to surprise my family with an unplanned visit home. I couldn't wait to see my wife, my kids, and even our neighbors. Despite the challenges of my job, it had been undeniably rewarding. Over the last 3 years, my salary had tripled, and my expertise in angle drilling during the U.S. oil boom made me an indispensable asset. 5 years ago, after receiving a promotion, I began planning for early retirement. To make the most of my earnings, I divided my paycheck into 3 portions, one to max out my 401k, another to invest 25% through a broker, and the rest deposited into our joint bank account. My wife and I prioritized paying off our mortgage while building a financial safety net. Over 2 decades, we had achieved substantial security through careful planning and investments. My broker skillfully diversified my portfolio, balancing company stock, major tech players like Google, Amazon, and Facebook, as well as reliable, dividend-paying blue-chip stocks. Despite being away so often, I stayed informed with regular investment reports sent directly to me. Tax season was also handled efficiently, we filed separately, with my wife claiming the kids' deductions. However, with the hurricane potentially hitting us directly, no one could return to the rigs until they passed a thorough inspection. As much as I anticipated the joy of surprising my family, the shadow of what lay ahead loomed large. I had built a life of stability and comfort, but it was hard not to wonder at what cost. Ensuring the safety of my team was always my top priority. I had insisted on these precautionary measures, knowing full well the risks involved in our line of work. A specialized crew would need to inspect the sea floor before operations could resume, and with the hurricane moving at a glacial pace, it seemed I'd have at least 2 months of downtime. As I monitored the storm's progress, I knew that every extra day it lingered would significantly increase reconstruction costs. Still, the alternative, rushing back without proper inspections, was unthinkable. The oil industry had learned these lessons the hard way. I had been part of the team that developed new safety protocols after BP's catastrophic oversight cost them billions in penalties and lawsuits. At the time, our advice had been ignored, leading to an environmental disaster that governments worldwide used to tighten their regulatory grip. Since then, the industry had pivoted, incorporating long-term shutdowns into their budgets and committing to safety measures that would prevent future catastrophes. A few $1 million spent on prevention now could save billions in damages and fines later. On the home front, my wife Shauna and I had built a life we were proud of. Shortly after purchasing our house, we met our neighbors, Jack and Jasmine Parsons. Shauna was pregnant with our first child, Hunter, at the time, and over the years, Jack and Jasmine became a significant part of our lives. Though they couldn't have children of their own, they treated our kids, Hunter, Alan, and Sarah, like family. Jack, despite his tendency to stretch the truth and his lack of social grace, had a knack for sales that kept him successful. Jasmine, on the other hand, was strikingly beautiful, the kind of woman who could tempt even the most steadfast man. If anyone could have tested my loyalty, it would have been her. As I sat at Tampa Airport, waiting for my connecting flight to St. Louis, my phone buzzed with a text from my daughter Sarah. I hadn't seen her in over 14 months, and the distance from my family had been weighing heavily on me, stirring thoughts of a career change. I called her immediately. "Hi, Dad," Sarah said as she answered. Her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of tension. "Thanks for calling back so quickly." "What's up, Buttercup?" I asked, using the nickname I'd given her when she was little. "Okay, here goes," she said, taking a deep breath. "Hunter's in the hospital with a bullet wound. Uncle Jack is in jail for attempted homicide. And Aunt Jasmine is pregnant." I froze, stunned. "Are you serious?" I finally managed to ask. "You said you wanted the bare facts," she replied. "But there's more you need to know before you talk to Mom." "Why's that?" I asked, my mind racing. "It's complicated," Sarah said carefully. "And there's a lot more to the story. You always taught us to listen to every side before making decisions, right? Well, Mom might give you a version that leaves out some details, especially since she's involved in the situation with Hunter, Uncle Jack, and Aunt Jasmine." "All right, Buttercup," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I'm about to board a flight to St. Louis. I'll catch the first one back to Cape in the morning. Skip school tomorrow, and I'll take a taxi home when I get there. Your mom will be at work by then." "You're coming home?" she asked, her tone lightening with relief. "That's great. Mom's in New York, by the way. Macy's called all the store managers to a meeting about boosting sales and cutting inventory. This region is one of the few still making a profit, so they're trying to figure out what's working." "Has she been informed?" I asked, still trying to wrap my head around everything Sarah had told me. "Not yet," Sarah admitted. "I thought it would be better if you were home first." As I hung up, my thoughts were a storm of their own, swirling with questions and dread. The career I'd built had provided stability and opportunity, but it had also kept me away from the people who mattered most. Now, as the chaos surrounding my family began to unfold, I couldn't help but wonder if the price I'd paid had been too high. "No, I'm still at the hospital, waiting to hear from the doctor," Sarah explained, her voice steady despite the situation. "I called you first because I thought you should know what's going on. I don't want to bring Mom into this until we've had a chance to talk." "Understood," I replied. "Let the billing department know I'll bring our medical cards in the morning. Thanks for texting me, Buttercup. Love you. See you tomorrow." "Love you too, Dad," she said softly before we hung up. As I tucked my phone back into my pocket, I prepared to head through security for my flight. The wait gave me time to think, something I rarely had the luxury to do amid the chaos of my work. My mind wandered back to my family, to the life Shauna and I had built, and to the sacrifices we'd made to get here. I'd spent most of our marriage working on oil rigs, starting at the very bottom and slowly climbing my way up. Those early days were grueling, but they shaped who I became. When I was offshore, I decided to take my future seriously and went back to school to improve myself. Around the same time, my relationship with Shauna deepened, fueling my determination to be better, for her, for us. 8 months after we started dating, I proposed. 6 months after that, we were married. I took on more responsibility offshore, and with Shauna's unwavering encouragement, my performance improved. It wasn't long before my hard work was rewarded with promotions and higher pay. Meanwhile, Shauna wasn't one to stand still either. She earned her business degree and began her career as a department manager at Macy's. Her knack for retail merchandising and leadership quickly propelled her through the ranks. Before long, she was managing her own store. Our neighbors, Jack and Jasmine Parsons, became an integral part of our lives. Jack, with his boisterous humor, and Jasmine, with her warmth, were like family to us. Jack used to joke that they'd unofficially adopted our kids. He wasn't far off, our children adored them and even started calling them Uncle Jack and Aunt Jasmine. It felt like we were all part of one extended family. But now, sitting at the airport waiting for my flight, Sarah's words echoed in my mind. The news she'd shared didn't add up, but she was adamant that it was all connected to our relationship with the Parsons. I couldn't fathom how. During my 3-hour layover in St. Louis, I found myself growing restless. St. Louis Airport was far from my favorite. No indoor smoking areas meant that if I wanted a cigarette, I'd have to head outside and navigate security again. Resigning myself to the inconvenience, I stepped outside for some air. It was there I ran into Gus, an old buddy I hadn't seen in years. His gruff voice called out as he spotted me. "Well, if it isn't the hardest working man on the rigs." "Gus," I said, smiling despite myself. "For an old fart, you're looking good. What brings you here?" "Headed back to Cape," he replied. "That's where I've settled with the wife and kids." "What about you?" "Same here," I said. "The weather shut down operations, so I got sent home early." "Back to Shauna and the kids." "You're still doing that rig work?" Gus asked, shaking his head with mock exasperation. "When are you gonna quit being a redneck and get yourself a real job?" I chuckled. "Working on it. Retirement's coming, maybe sooner than I thought. I'm looking for something that keeps me home at night. Shauna will be surprised, that's for sure." "Wait, Shauna? Shauna from Cape? You married her?" Gus asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, that's right," I replied, a smile tugging at my lips as I thought back to when we'd first met. As I waited for my next flight, the memories kept flooding back. I thought about how far we'd come and how much we'd shared. But beneath it all, a knot of uncertainty tightened in my chest. Something was wrong, something I couldn't ignore. Tomorrow, I'd finally be home. But what kind of home was I walking into? When I was out on a date, Sarah began, her voice trembling slightly, "Mom was having a romantic dinner with Uncle Jack." I couldn't believe it at first, but I decided to let her continue, just to see how far it would go. It was so strange. Jasmine usually worked late on Fridays, and Mom was supposed to be working too. But my boyfriend and I decided to look into it. She paused, as if gathering her thoughts, then continued. We started noticing a pattern. Uncle Jack would always leave his truck parked at Macy's, and then Mom would meet him there. From there, they'd drive off together, sitting close like a couple. Her voice cracked. "Dad, it was so wrong. It felt like a betrayal to all of us." I didn't like what I was hearing, but I trusted Sarah. "You've been through a lot, Buttercup," I said softly. "I'll hear Hunter's side of the story too, but not right now. First, we'll take care of the hospital paperwork. Then we'll find a good divorce attorney. When is your mom due back home?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Saturday morning," Sarah replied. "What are you going to do, Dad?" I sighed heavily. "I can't stay here tonight," I said. "I'm going to rent a car and stay at a hotel for now. Once I return with the rental, we'll take care of a few things. Tonight, I need you to call your mom. Put her on speaker so I can record the conversation, it'll help my lawyer." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, and she started to cry. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "Hey," I said, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder, "none of this is your fault. You did the right thing by telling me." We left Cape together and checked into a modest motel in Marble Hill, far enough from home to keep a low profile. After settling in, we headed to Southeast Hospital to finalize the insurance paperwork for Hunter. Over lunch, Hunter called Sarah. "Jasmine is here with me," he told her. "And, yeah, I know Dad's back." Sarah quickly told him to keep that information quiet, at least for now. We had a plan to inform Shauna that evening, and we didn't want anything jeopardizing it. Our next stop was a real estate office. I wasn't just thinking about the immediate fallout, I was planning for the future. If a divorce was inevitable, I'd need to make big changes to my life, starting with finding a new place to live. Privately, Jasmine had reached out to me, offering an explanation. We met discreetly, and she was visibly upset. "I thought Jack was planning some sort of anniversary surprise," she began. But instead, he told me outright, Shauna and Jack were having an affair. I didn't believe him at first. I mean, how could I? But then he drove me to his apartment. What I saw through the window left no doubt. "Jack and your wife, they were together, intimately." Her voice cracked as she pulled out her phone. I was devastated, she admitted, scrolling through her photos. I didn't want to believe it, but I took these pictures to remind myself it wasn't just a bad dream. "These confirm everything Sarah and I have been telling you." I stared at the images, my stomach sinking as the truth hit me. "Jasmine," I said after a long pause, "could you text me those pictures? I'll need them for the divorce." She nodded silently, her expression a mix of anger and sorrow. As she sent the images, I felt a surge of resolve. The betrayal was undeniable, and while the path ahead would be difficult, I knew what needed to be done. That night, as we prepared to confront Shauna, I steeled myself for what was to come. My family deserved the truth, no matter how painful it might be. "Jasmine," I said, my voice low but steady, "whatever decision you and Hunter make, I'll respect it. But I want you to know that your timeline and the images you provided have been confirmed. Thank you for helping me see the truth." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Thank you, Harold," she said softly. "Hunter told me you'd approach it this way, with patience and thoughtfulness. That's why he trusts you." She paused, then added, "Jack had already been served with divorce papers. That's what set him off. He was under a court order to stay away from me, but you know how he is. He's always had a temper when things didn't go his way." She glanced down at her hands. "The shooting makes more sense now. He must have gone back to confront me, found Hunter there, and just lost control." I nodded grimly. Jack's volatile nature had always been an issue, but this time, it had crossed a line none of us could have imagined. Later that evening, Sarah and I worked together to prepare for the difficult conversation ahead. After trying a few apps, we found one that allowed us to record calls discreetly. We downloaded it and tested it before making the call. When the app was ready, Sarah dialed Shauna's number. After 3 rings, Shauna answered. "Hi, sweetie," she said warmly. "Mom, I need a note for missing school today," Sarah said, keeping her tone casual. "What happened? Are you sick?" Shauna asked, her concern evident. "No," Sarah replied, "I was at the hospital with Hunter last night and was too exhausted to go to school this morning." "What happened to Hunter? Is he okay? Will he regain full use of his shoulder?" Shauna asked, her voice tightening with worry. Sarah took a deep breath before responding. "Hunter was shot in the shoulder, at close range," she said bluntly. "What?" Shauna exclaimed. I gave Sarah a thumbs up, silently encouraging her to continue. She caught my eye and smiled faintly, knowing she had my full support. "Uncle Jack violated the court order," Sarah explained. "He went into his old house, found Jasmine and Hunter together, and in a rage, grabbed a weapon and shot Hunter." "But Mom, what do you want me to tell Dad when I call him?" Shauna hesitated. "Where are Hunter and Uncle Jack now?" she asked cautiously. "Uncle Jack is in jail for attempted homicide," Sarah replied. "Hunter will recover, but he needs major rehab. So, Mom, do I tell Dad, or would you prefer to? Shauna sighed heavily. Let me think about how to respond, she said. Sarah ended the call, her hands trembling slightly as she put her phone down. She glanced at me. I think she knows everything is about to come out, Sarah said. We didn't have to wait long for confirmation. Sarah brought her laptop over, and we opened the news. The front page story stopped us cold. The headline read, "Husband shoots wife's lover," and it laid out the scandal in excruciating detail. The article exposed the tangled relationships between all of us and revealed something we hadn't known before: Jack Parsons wasn't even his real name. His fingerprints had identified him as Raymond John Smith, a man with a record for petty theft and an outstanding warrant for possession of pills with intent to distribute. The revelations hit us like a freight train. I called the police for more information, but even they seemed stunned by the depths of Jack's, or rather, Raymond's, deceptions. As Sarah and I sat processing everything, I couldn't help but voice what was on my mind. I wonder what else they were involved in, I said. It feels like we've only scratched the surface. Just then, a knock at the door pulled us from our thoughts. Sarah answered it and returned with Jasmine in tow. I poured her a sour mash and soda, handing it to her as she entered the kitchen. Jasmine, I said, motioning to the laptop. You need to see this. We showed her the updated article. She read it in silence, her face pale as she absorbed the details. I had no idea, she murmured, her voice shaky. Sarah texted me the recording of her conversation with Shauna, and I played it for Jasmine. As she listened, the betrayal sunk deeper. Jasmine, I said gently, if Jack, or Raymond, had been driving Shauna's truck daily and staying out overnight, why would Shauna keep his secrets? Surely she must have seen the bills for his purchases. Jasmine shook her head slowly. I think she turned a blind eye, she said. Or maybe she was involved in more than we know. The room grew quiet, the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on all of us. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about infidelity, it was about deception, manipulation, and secrets that went far deeper than any of us had imagined. Jack always claimed that the corporation handled everything, I said, shaking my head. Did you ever see any monthly statements or money transfers? Jasmine asked hesitantly. No, I admitted. But I know his Outlook account. Maybe we could check it, she suggested. We went back to her house, and after logging into Jack's computer, I searched for his Outlook account. What we found was startling. Jack had 4 additional email accounts linked to his primary one, each appearing to serve a specific, hidden purpose. One account turned out to be a ledger, meticulously detailing financial transactions that painted a troubling picture. Sarah, I called out, go tell Jasmine what we found while I check these bags. Sarah returned with Jasmine 5 minutes later. The 5 duffel bags we discovered were stuffed with cash. The 6th contained Jack's ledger. Harold, Jasmine said, her voice trembling, can you check my place? Right after I call the cops, I replied, dialing the police. A patrol car arrived shortly after. Once the officers were informed, I headed to Jasmine's house to continue the search. In the attic, I made a chilling discovery, a chest filled with cocaine. I placed Jack's ledger alongside it and called the police again, this time requesting a detective to take over. Are you going to tell Mom about this? Sarah asked nervously when I got back. It's better to let the detective handle that, I said. I'll finish searching both houses tomorrow while you're at school. Thanks, Harold. I appreciate it, Jasmine said quietly. Jasmine, I need you to follow me to the car rental place tomorrow, I told her firmly. I'm not leaving my daughter alone here. Can I stay here tonight? She asked. Of course. You can sleep in Hunter's old room, I said. Around midnight, the sound of police sirens woke us. They'd caught someone attempting to break into Jasmine's house. The incident only deepened the sense of danger surrounding Jack's, or rather, Raymond's, hidden life. The next morning, Jasmine followed me to return the rental car, after which we picked up my luggage and checked out of the motel. I suggested she get Hunter's apartment key and stay there temporarily while things settled. Later that day, I looked at 4 houses with a real estate broker. One of them, a newly built home in a quiet subdivision, stood out. I made a cash offer with a substantial deposit, requesting a quick closing and a 5-year warranty. I purchased new locks and texted Jasmine and Sarah to update them. Back at Jasmine's house, I resumed the search. While I didn't find any additional drugs, there were documents suggesting Jack's ties to a broader criminal network. I couldn't believe how much of his life had been a lie. It's unsettling to think we've been living alongside criminals for years without knowing it, I told the detective who had arrived to examine the evidence. I'm eager to question Shauna about her relationship with him and how long it's been going on. One more thing, I added. Jack, if that's even his real name, was married to my wife's high school best friend, Ashley, before he married Jasmine. Ashley might be flying in on Saturday to help verify some of this. The detective raised an eyebrow and smiled wryly. This just keeps getting more interesting, he said as Jasmine pulled into the driveway. Does his current wife know about all this? He asked. Yes, I replied. And I'm about to search her house thoroughly. As the day wound down, Sarah and I planned to visit Hunter together. He's recovering slowly, I told the detective. He and Jasmine are planning to live together temporarily to see if the age difference between them works. That sounds mature and well thought out, the detective said with a nod of approval. For the first time in days, I felt a faint glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but at least we were finally uncovering the truth and taking steps to rebuild our lives. Thanks, Dad, Hunter said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. I appreciate everything you've done for Jasmine. I don't know how you're managing all of this. I looked at him, feeling the weight of the past few days. Son, I said, choosing my words carefully, I may not agree with what your mother did, but I have to acknowledge my part in this. My job kept me away, and while that doesn't excuse her actions, loneliness can lead people to make choices they might regret. Hunter nodded, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. I never thought about it that way, he admitted. If I ever find myself in another relationship, I continued, I'll make sure my lifestyle isn't a barrier to being fully present for the people I care about. We talked for a while longer, reflecting on the family we'd been and what the future might hold. After we said our goodbyes, I headed to the airport to meet Ashley, Shauna's high school best friend and Jack's, or rather, Raymond's, ex-wife. As soon as I walked into the terminal, I spotted her. She stood alone, the last flight to St. Louis having just departed. Ashley had an understated elegance about her. Her brown hair framed her face, softening her features, and her simple blue jeans and casual outfit conveyed a quiet confidence. My first impression was that she was someone completely at ease with herself. She approached me with a warm smile. You look just like the photo Gus sent me, she said, extending her hand. Nice to meet you, Mr. Phillips. Call me Harold, I said, shaking her hand. We didn't waste time. As we walked to my truck, we discussed the situation at hand. The fact that Shauna and my ex were involved raises a lot of questions, Ashley remarked. Do you think you can manage this while traveling back and forth? I asked. She smiled. I run my own divorce firm from home, Harold. Plus, I'll be spending time here dealing with my deadbeat ex-husband anyway. I couldn't help but grin. Looks like we've got a deal, I said. If you have access to a printer, we can get started today. Ashley nodded, and we loaded Shauna's luggage into my truck. On the way, I informed her that Raymond, Jack, was in the county jail. Ashley expressed a desire to confront him, so we stopped for coffee, and I handed over the images Jasmine had provided. At her suggestion, I brought up the matter of the house. I don't want to keep it after everything that's happened, I said. Could Shauna afford to buy you out? Ashley asked. Based on how we've split household finances, she should be able to, I replied. We spent the next couple of hours preparing the necessary paperwork. Ashley's efficiency was impressive. I gave her the access code to print the documents, and together, we sorted everything to file with the county court on Monday. Later that evening, my daughter returned home after spending time with friends. The instant connection between her and Ashley was obvious. It was as if they had known each other for years, their conversation flowing naturally and effortlessly. By Monday morning, I was back in the courtroom for the arraignment. Charges against Jack Parsons and Shauna were read aloud. Jack was denied bail outright, while Shauna's bail was set at $500,000. To finalize the next steps, Ashley served Shauna with divorce papers on my behalf. She also took the opportunity to serve her ex-husband for back support. As we left the courtroom, Ashley and I walked out hand in hand, a quiet statement of solidarity. I couldn't help but notice the looks Jack and Shauna shot our way, a mix of shock and resentment. It was earlier that day that I'd begun to feel the faint stirrings of something new, an opportunity to rebuild, not just for myself, but for the people I cared about. I finalized the purchase of my new house by delivering the remaining bearer bonds. By 4 p.m., Ashley had successfully filed the divorce papers and paid the court fees. It felt like a significant step forward, one that signaled a fresh start amidst all the chaos. Later that evening, Ashley discovered a letter tucked inside an old book she was organizing. The contents were chilling. It revealed that Earl, Jack's associate, had planned to use the bearer bonds to get himself and Shauna out of town. When I confronted Earl over the phone, his voice wavered. "I guess you're in Jack's ledger too," I said, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. "How do you know about the ledger?" Earl stammered. "I gave it to the cops," I replied calmly. "It's only a matter of time before they come for all of you. If you want a chance to escape, you might want to use what's left in that bag to disappear. But if Sarah is hurt in any way, don't think for a second you'll get off that easily." Panic laced his voice as he made another call, instructing his brothers to drop Sarah off and flee. He understood how dire the situation had become. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Ashley. "Sarah's back," she confirmed, relief evident in her voice. When Sarah arrived, she said little at first, but the tension was palpable as she glanced at Shauna. The reunion was telling, full of unspoken emotions and reactions. Later, Sarah and I had a quiet moment alone. "Mom was never going to be honest with you, was she?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. "No," I replied after a pause. "And now, I'm starting to wonder if she used my money to help Jack get back into the pill business." My words surprised even me, but they struck a chord with Sarah. We agreed to keep certain details, like the letter Ashley had found, between us. "Things didn't go the way Jack and Shauna planned," I said grimly. With that, I called the detective to update him on Jack's latest scheme. "You might want to check Shauna's walk-in closet," I added, unsure of what else we might uncover. Later that night, as we packed up what little we wanted from the old house, Sarah asked, "Dad, should we take pots, pans, and the basic stuff?" I considered it for a moment. "No," I said. "Let's start fresh. Once we pack our personal items and bring them to the new house, you and Ashley can go shopping for whatever we need." Ashley pointed out the built-in blinds on the new windows. "At least you'll have privacy until you get curtains," she noted. By the time we unloaded the truck, the essentials were in place. My bedroom and Sarah's room were set up, the living and family rooms were organized, and the kitchen table and chairs were ready for use. We had what we needed to start, though the internet wasn't up yet. For now, we relied on the laptop and free Wi-Fi. As we settled in, we finally allowed ourselves a moment to breathe. When Sarah stepped outside, I followed. She gave me a small smile as she glanced across the street. "Dad, look," she said, gesturing. Jasmine and Hunter had just emerged from the house across from ours. It was comforting to know that they were close by, beginning their own new chapter. For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. Our new home wasn't just a place to live, it was a chance to rebuild, to create something better from the pieces of what had been broken. Ashley and I drove Shauna's car over to her place. I waited outside while Ashley went in to talk to her. About an hour later, she returned, looking thoughtful but frustrated. "Did you get some answers?" I asked as she climbed back into the car. "Not really," Ashley replied with a sigh. Their relationship started after my divorce, but Shauna kept dodging the deeper questions. We didn't dwell on it. There was still plenty to do at the new house. That afternoon, Ashley and Sarah had gone shopping, filling Sarah's room with everything she needed: towels, bath mats, a small trash can, and even a matching alarm clock and nightstand lights. Sarah had also picked out some toiletries for me, including shower soap and shampoo. Once they were back, I got to work breaking down the empty boxes. I took them to the burn pile along with a few more from the kitchen. Before lighting the pile, I walked through the house to check out the setup. In the kitchen, the new coffee pot, toaster, and microwave were already in place. I couldn't help but feel pleased with how everything was coming together. Meanwhile, Ashley and Sarah worked on organizing Sarah's room. Once they finished, I lit the burn pile, watching the flames flicker and rise into the cool night sky. Lost in thought, I reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. This fire wasn't just clearing away packaging, it felt symbolic, like we were shedding the remnants of our old life and making space for something better. A knock at the door woke me later that night. Sarah needed a ride to school, and I quickly dressed and met her by the door. She grinned at me as I adjusted my shirt. "Dad, you look happier than I've seen you in years," she said. Her words caught me off guard but warmed me all the same. "Thanks, Buttercup," I replied with a smile. "I'm happy for us, too." After dropping her off, I promised to pick her up later in the day. Back at home, I allowed myself a rare moment of relaxation. For the first time since leaving the rigs, there were no pressing tasks, nothing urgent demanding my attention. So, I spent the morning cuddling with Ashley, grateful for the calm after the storm. Around lunchtime, AT&T arrived to install the internet. Shortly after, Ashley's parents pulled up with her rental car. We spent the afternoon unpacking more boxes, getting everything settled. That evening, I couldn't help but reflect on the events of the past few months. There had been moments of danger and confrontation, like when I found Sarah held captive by Earl and confronted him with a loaded crossbow. I gave him one chance to release Sarah or die, I'd told Ashley's father, George, earlier that week. He hesitated, so I made him call his brothers and tell them I was coming. I can honestly say he was still alive when I left. "What about now?" George asked, raising an eyebrow. "Time will tell," I replied with a shrug. George smiled and clapped me on the shoulder. "You're old school, Harold. Welcome to the family. I'd be proud to have a grandson from you someday." His words stayed with me, a reassurance that we shared the same values, tough but principled, much like the Missouri red mud that always finds a way to stick. 6 months later, life looked completely different. The chaos of the past felt like a distant memory as I embraced the fresh start we'd all worked so hard to build.